Hey everybody, this is Silver Spook, and this is the Silver Spook video about, um, well, this is just basically me talking to myself for the next little bit. Well, this is gonna be a video that I thought I would try to do because number one, SAG-AFTRA strike and writers strikes are ongoing, and we want to support that. So we want to just avoid doing anything that might get in the way of those actions. But also, I wanted to just kind of to see how this goes. I used to do more streams back in the day that were more along the lines of just me talking about. Well, I mean, most of the streams are still me talking about a whole variety of topics, depending on kind of whatever comes up. Not always pertaining to the video that I am ostensibly supposed to be talking about, or the show or TV show or game, etc. But another thing was that John Romero, who is one of the legends in the game industry, which I am in, obviously, as an independent game developer, as a trans, indigenous, anti-capitalist game developer also, but that's another thing. But John Romero is somebody who recently put out a book that I just started reading that is called Doom Guy Life in the First Person. And so I'm not going to do a review of this book right now. I've not finished it. But I think at some point I probably will come back and talk just about this book. And John is also somebody who I've had the pleasure of being in panels with at the, what was it? It was the Gay Gaming Pros. It was actually streamed on the front page of Twitch, which was really cool. And also John is in the Indigenous Game Dev Circle because he's also an Indigenous person. He's Yaqui and Cherokee on one side of his family, his mom's side. I think that comes up early on in this book. And then he's also Mexican on his dad's side. And so, but this is just like it's like a in-depth look at it's basically his entire life. It's basically what it's just his entire life. And somebody was asking him, like, so is this about like setting the record straight? Because there's a lot of like legends and hearsay and like stories around you. John of id Software, the Doom guy, co-founder of the legendary first-person shooter games Wolfenstein and Doom, and he's like, well, no, it's just me telling my story. It's not really about correcting anything in particular. And so Holly helped me get that. So special thanks to Holly for helping with that, helping acquire that game. Acquire the book. But yeah. Anyways, so I was kind of like, I was just thinking, I'll just, I'm not trying to do that. I just thought like I'll just talk about stuff from my own life because like a lot of people know Neofeud. I talk about this game all the time because as a one person so basically solo dev and then a small cooperative of myself and Holly, as we often talk about, and the many junior members of the Silver Spook cooperative / Hui. It's we talk a lot about the games and things related to the games, the topics explored in the games. I do that a lot. I stream the games. I've played the games. I do let's plays of my own games, and I try to share the things that are happening in the sequel to Neofeud 2, which is not out yet, but I'm trying to finish it within the next little bit, like hopefully in the next few months. I'm not sure when it'll be coming out, but as I said, like within a couple months I should have basically the rough cut, the unpolished gem of Neofeud 2 completed within a few months, 2-3 months. I think I said like end of September, but at the current rate it should be on track. But anyways, so I kind of like showing stuff about the game. Look at me, I'm already showing stuff about the second game, but yeah, it's you know, I used to do more talking about stuff related to my life and how that is inspiring things in the game. But and there are some interviews I did early on that you can check out. I think one of them was with I don't know if it's still up. This guy Brandon. Uh, uh, there's actually multiple interviews with myself all over the place, but this is one where I talked a lot. I talked more about my life. This is from 6 years ago when the game Neofeud first came out, way back in the day. Um, yeah. Also, I'm sorry I started late because I was basically like debating like what the heck I'm gonna do today. But Brandon did an interview with me. This is a lot more of my personal life and experiences. This picture is a picture from Terminus Machina. That is a 3D cyberpunk Deus Ex mod. And so that's one version of myself, I guess. And Brandon did work on Neofeud as well. He was the voice actor for multiple characters, including the General, Coke Jobs, and the Gibson, the tripping out of his mind, MK Ultra 2, junkie robot, and several other characters. But anyways, but I mean, maybe, I guess this is where I used to start. Is my formative years in childhood. See, this is. I forgot how to do this. You know, I've been doing so much like modern. I don't know what it is. Modern streaming. That it's. I've kind of forgotten how to like just talk about my personal life. I haven't done this in so long. And also, what's up, Victor? So this is like practice remembering how to just talk about yourself in a, because usually, you know what it is, you know, it's partially, it's like doing, like I do a lot of activism and on top of activism, pushing on certain issues and important political actions, and then also education, which they all kind of go together, right? But like education, especially when it comes to like things related to indigenous topics, dealing with terrible economic and political systems, geopolitics, and doing a lot of that work has really complicated everything. Not complicated. It's just like I spend so much time on that. It does kind of warp everything else. Before I finished Neofeud, and before I released the game, and was so much on social media. I was way less on social media. So, and then I was not involved in that promotional process. So that has definitely like changed this. And so I used to just kind of, you know, it's a different mindset. I think is part of it. It's like just talking about like your upbringing. Like it was like reading this book. When I was reading the Doom guy, I'm like, it's just like, this is just stuff that happened to me in my life. This is some other things that happened to me, and like it's all like, it's important stuff. You know, it's not like it's, but it's like, it's it is just like, this is my life. You know, as opposed to like, this is what's happening now, and this is what we have to do. It's a different. You know, I think that's one thing about the present is that the 20 teens to the present is definitely like, there's much more urgency to everything, right? And it's hard to slow down because it's kind of like, but you know, and part of that's social media, but it's not necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily social media, but all social media does like push the things that are most urgent that need to happen right now and be changed right now to the forefront. But it's also like, but it's kind of like those. There should have been more urgency earlier. You know, is another way to think about that. But then also makes it harder to. It can make it harder to write entire books. Let's put it that way, or write entire game scripts sometimes, without getting distracted. But anyways, see, look, I'm distracting myself right now. But anyways, but you know, going back to the very beginning, like this, it's actually a good place to start because I was unsure, like, where the hell do I even start with this? Like many people from the islands, because I am Silver Spook, I am a native Hawaiian. I am a person from very diverse heritage. Yeah, part Native Hawaiian, Japanese, Native American, but specifically Choctaw. But I'm not connected with or practicing in the Choctaw Nation. So I don't want to claim like I'm like, that's a not good thing to do. But I like deep far back in ancestry, like several past the great grandmother, I think, level. I am Native American, Native Choctaw, German, Portuguese, and I have trouble keeping track after that. I like to joke that I have all the ethnicities from every continent except Antarctica. So the only people I'm not related to are penguins. Not related to Happy Feet. So I feel bummed about that. I was born and raised in Honolulu in the not so nice side of the coconut trees part of the city where mostly immigrant service industry workers live. Although recently the area is gentrifying with skyrocket. This is actually from 6 years ago. So this is older. It's yeah, it's definitely not good there in terms of property values and rent prices, which is part of the reason my family and I are moving to the. Well, actually, this is interesting because this is actually 6 years ago. I hadn't even moved to the Big Island yet of Hawaii. I was still on Oahu, that's a mega city island with Pearl Harbor and Waikiki and Disney Aulani and all that, the giant city. The New York built in the tropics is another way to think about that. It's Manhattan dropped on top of a tropical island, but moving to so we were planning to move at the time to the Big Island to live in a small off-grid house. My parents, we're not off-grid right now, so that's one difference. My parents are both Catholic school teachers, and I went to private Catholic school for most of my youth. I had slum friends in the neighborhood that lived 22 a house, surviving on ramen and spam from food stamps. Just dirt poor. On weekends, we would run through the forest barefoot. You know what I'll do is I'm gonna bust this out, and I'll put the background image up here. Where the hell is it? There. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Oop. I had slum friends from the neighborhood, lived 22 a house, surviving on ramen and spam from food stamps. Just dirt poor. On weekends, we'd run through the forest barefoot, playing games like Rock War, which involves whipping rocks at each other and trying not to get bloodied. I'm not joking. That's like when I was reading the John Romero book, he's like, yeah, me and my brother, we would throw beans and rice at each other because John Romero grew up in he was a lot of his life he was raised by his mom and his grandmother he spent a lot of time with, and they had tacos and taquitos, and they always had beans and rice around, and they're very poor, right? They were on food stamps the whole time, and poor Mexican and indigenous people, and his dad worked in a copper mine, like being paid crap to basically do near old school colonial level exploited labor. Anyways, so John Romero would pick up beans and rice from his jars full of beans and rice and throw them at his brother, and then his brother would throw them back like they were fighting in a beans and rice war. It was a food fight, but it was like that was the beginning. That's the one thing he's kind of like, that was the beginning of my first person shooter. So before I made Doom, I made rice versus beans shooter, and we'd just be throwing rice and beans at each other. And now I want to say, John, I think I had a much more hardcore upbringing because we would just throw literal rocks at each other. That's how I learned how to make first person shooters. We'd pick up rocks in the back of dystopian, the cyberpunk dystopia side of the Hawaii coconut trees, and we just throw rocks at each other. And then whoever's face, like if you hit somebody in the head with a rock, that's not like a big rock like that. If you hit someone in the head with a rock, it would split their head open. Like somebody might get a concussion. If you got a concussion, you lost. If you crack your head, if your nose broke, you lost the rock war. That's how you know. So, we would play that every single day, but that was the game they played. And then the big brother from high school would come and then like whip one at the younger kids real hard, and then the game would be over because then people would be screaming. But anyways, so that's not what we did all day, but that's like the level of everyone was on food stamps. Like everyone qualified, guaranteed. Everyone was broke. My parents they just happened to luck out because they lived in a because my parents taught at private Catholic schools, right? They got a special deal with the Catholic Church that they would be allowed to live at very, very, very reduced rent rates, basically, at a former Catholic seminary on Catholic property. So they were literally basically feudal serfs, right? As long as they worked and taught the children. Now the children they were teaching were the children of wealthy people, right? Or Catholic. At the time, it was earlier on. It was a little bit more, they had reduced tuition rates, but later on it was just it was a college prep school for the very well off. Today it definitely is that. It costs $25,000 a year to go there. But the Catholic school they teach at is what allowed them to have a house, because otherwise they basically would be homeless. They were like, or they would not be in Hawaii anymore. They would be, I don't know, they would be somewhere else because they could not afford Hawaii. Most Hawaiians don't live in Hawaii. It's very sad. They just be pushed out. They'd be with John Romero's family in the copper mine. But anyways, so rock war involves whipping rocks at each other, trying not to get bloodied. They were crazy kids, but we had good times building tree houses and cannonballing or just like jumping into Tin Roof. Tin Roof is a place in the back of this valley, Kalihi Valley. Fun fact, Kalihi Valley actually has statistically the most impoverished areas in the United States. It's actually in Hawaii. It's the most impoverished area in the United States. 69% of the certain area codes within this valley on Oahu live in poverty. So, I'm like, it's like, I didn't realize. I was like, wow, I'm so lucky. I'm like, I'm in such a unique, like we're number one. So I'm from the number one place of poverty in the United States. It's actually in Hawaii. I looked it up and I was like, wow, I didn't realize it's that poor. I mean, part of it is because it's one of the highest, most dense, immigrant populations. It's not even a state of the United States. It's an island far from the United States. Historically, Hawaii was a colony. It was basically a slave plantation well into the 20th century. So that all of that makes it and this is like the headquarters for the poverty slave plantation, right? I didn't know that when I wrote this. Interview that I sent to one of the voice actors and also journalist, author from who voiced one of the characters from Neofeud, Brandon. But now I know that's why. But at the time I was just like, oh, everyone's real broke here. Why is everybody so broke and throwing rocks at each other? Why is everybody like living? There's like a 2-bedroom house, and there's like 30 people inside. And that's just like normal, like I was looking at New York City. It's like, oh wow, we have this tiny little space, and Big Teal's up in the chat. What's up, Big Teal? And I was looking at Voltaire, famous goth musician slash micro to medium celebrity who lives in a tilting apartment building where there are mushrooms growing in the roof, right? And the space is like slightly bigger than a shoebox. But it's basically him, right? And see, in Kalihi, where I'm from in Hawaii, you have a space like that, but then there's 30 people live in that. And everybody sleeps on top of each other, It's a lot like parts of the most broke parts of New York City. Yeah. And so it's yeah, so we had slum friends that lived 22 house surviving on ramen and food stamps and dirt poor. And then they were crazy kids, but we had good times building tree houses, cannonballing into Tin Roof. There's a big pond at the back. It's called Tin Roof. If you know Hawaii, you might have heard of Tin Roof. There's also a place called Ice Pond way in the back. The water at Ice Pond it basically feels like ice. Now, if you're from so-called Canada, or if you're from up there in the Pacific Northwest, you're from some glacial Yeti and tundra-filled wasteland, right? Where cold water is like negative 200 degrees, absolute zero water, and normal water is just negative 60, right? like where Howley's from. Then you're like, what are you talking about? That's not cold. But ice spa in Hawaii, like 50-degree water, 50-degree Fahrenheit water is freezing cold. Right. So a big deal says, where my family and I first moved to the U.S., we were only in a 2-bedroom. Yeah, it's it's something like, yeah, no, people like the kids that I work with, when I was working with the impoverished children in Hawaii, they were like, those kids were sleeping. They were like worse off than that. They were like, they were just like kids piled inside of rooms with the adults will be coming and going, because it's like the whole thing was just like super impoverished, basically colonial labor, like Micronesians, Thai, Filipino, Laotian, Cambodian, a lot of Filipinos, but the newer ones are Micronesian, Chukis, Marshallese. The islands are disappearing beneath the waves, and the climate change is like swallowing up their atolls, an inch at a time. They're basically, and so part of it, there's mass migration. They're also the places that were nuked, obviously, by the United States, 67 times, and the radiation that caused the jellyfish babies and the mass birth defects is kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth, and the taste is radioactive waste that is gonna cause you to grow 3 tongues out of your first tongue. So, but anyway, so those are the kind of people that lived in this area. They're basically like all the secret. A lot of them are secret laborers, and that's why it's a 69% poverty rate. The Micronesian family, I think the average wage for a Marshallese a few years, just recently, was $5,000 a year. So that's the average wage for these people, $5,000 a year, in the so-called United States. And Hawaii is the most expensive place by far to live in the so-called United States, by magnitudes worse than DC, worse than New York, worse than DC by far. And they make $5,000 a year. That's how much people make where I'm from. Anyways, so let's move on though. But then on Mondays, my siblings and I would all get in our cheap old Toyota Corolla and then get shuttled off to a fancy preparatory school where everyone wore nice uniforms and dodgeball was illegal. So where I'm from, when I woke up and I was in the neighborhood, right? People lived in cardboard boxes, basically. People lived in like literal like favela style, right? People lived like the houses would burn down and nobody would investigate. Houses would just burn down because nobody cares. People would die inside. People were locked inside of rooms when houses burned down. That's the kind of place this is. It's like who had in Kalihi Valley, there are locks outside of the bedrooms. So you have like a compound with maybe like 6 bedrooms, but there's like all these like countless people living inside, and then the locks are not inside the door. So like sometimes you're like, you're like a teenager, you're like, screw you, mom and dad, I'm gonna turn up 9 Inch Nails to 11 and I'm gonna like blast that while I play Doom and shoot demons and shoot Nazis in Wolfenstein, and you're gonna get mad, right? And you lock the door. Your parents are like, turn that music down, turn that satanic music down, turn out your alt goth PLC music down, right? I did an alt goth panel back in the day, about a year ago. But then, but imagine a house now. Now I was lucky that the locks were inside my bedroom, right? But in the area of Kalihi Valley, the houses commonly have locks outside the bedroom, so you can lock people into bedrooms. The reason why people, just imagine why houses routinely have locks outside the bedrooms. Who's running that? Who's running that house, right? So there was a story where a house burned down in Kalihi, and then people died inside the bedrooms. But the reason they died was because the people were locked into the bedrooms, right? Why did they do that? It's because it's basically slave labor inside of the United States. A lot of them are Pacific Islanders, trafficked in. They have like managers that it's disgusting. You can learn more about that if you want. Human traffickers, like that guy that just got convicted of child trafficking, being Mr. Sound of Freedom. That was like a conservative Christian right winger that's talking about the problems with the human trafficking of other people, especially LGBTQ plus and drag queens, but it's actually Christian conservatives and just Western white cis people generally, especially those in power. That's the kind of place that this is, like people that are like locked inside of rooms, being moved around and being abused, working in hotels, like sexual labor, forced, just all that kind of stuff. But then also just like regular people that are just trying to survive and then working super impoverished, the most lowest wages you can imagine, making $5,000 a year or less. $5,000 a year, that could be pretty good, you know. Yeah. So that's like the kind of houses that they have there. But anyways, let's move on from that. I'm just expanding on this, but so let me back up slightly. So as some friends from the neighborhood that live 22 house surveying on ramen and span and food stamps, and they played Dodge the Rock on Monday, me and my siblings would all get into our cheap old Toyota Corolla, shuttle off to the fancy preparatory school where everyone wore nice uniforms. A dodgeball was illegal to avoid lawsuits. So that just is an illustration, right? So where I was living when I woke up, people couldn't afford balls, right? People making $5,000 a year per person, unable to afford balls to throw at each other. When I went to the school, because my parents taught at this fancy school, because again they're Catholic serfs, right, under the U.S. occupation and colonial Christian feudalism, you know. The Catholic Church gave them a discounted rent so they would go teach at this school for rich children. So the kids at the school that I went to, right, their parents were like real estate agents. Their parents were like related to Warren Buffett. Their parents were literally like Obama, you know. Their parents, I'm not joking, he went to the school across from my parents, where my parents taught. Punahou is Obama's school. That school is $40,000 a year now. Oldest school west of the Mississippi also. And so at this school, you couldn't throw anything at anyone because all the parents would just lawyer up immediately and sue the bejesus out of each other, because that's all they have money to weaponize the courts, so-called justice system of the so-called United States. And just to avoid all these lawsuits, they banned dodgeball. Well, when I first went to the school, they had dodgeball, then they banned it. And so that's the kind of people that were at the school. So it's mostly white, very light Asian, all the sellout boba Asians, and you know, the people who want to become presidents of the United States, senators, you know. And I often joke about, I was trained at a stormtrooper training facility to be a Goldman Sachs high frequency trading algorithm programmer, but like that's what a lot of people became who graduated from this school, right? Multiple of them have become representatives in Senate. I know someone who is a U.S. politician who went to my school. Sadly, they were representing Hawaii, but you know, we can't. We all have our skeletons in the closet. Sometimes we become American representatives in a so-called democracy. So you know, but we all have our flaws. So I forgive them that. I don't forgive them that. But you know, the school I went to was a school that prepared people to become billionaires, presidents, fancy lawyers for Apple, senators, Silicon Valley executives. That's the kind of school that this was. The people who went to this school, and so they were like they were mostly wealthy. Some of them were around, but a lot of them were, you know, they were enlightened. Let's put it that way. They were westernized. They were by a program of forced westernization, forced Americanization, and they were like the Kamala Harrises, right, of Hawaii, well off, very well off, very rah America, right? Sometimes not, but then even if they weren't, they were going along with the United States' abuses in Hawaii, right? And so the $5,000 an hour, $5,000 a year, 20 to a house, most impoverished people, all like newer Asia Pacific trafficked people, to work for literal starvation wages in hotels, as in-home care workers for retired millionaires from America who live in Hawaii, to work as sexual slaves for U.S. military, very common, because the U.S. military is the number one most common 13-year-olds, Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiian girls were found to be most commonly uh, being sexually abused by U.S. military personnel. So U.S. military personnel, and then, but also just general to service the tourism industry, to service the ultra rich of Hawaii and the medium rich that service them. So that's the kind of people that were in where I was born, mostly Pacific Islander, mostly non-white, right? And then where I went to school is where all the most wealthy people on the planet send their kids. So I was an overweight Hawaiian-looking kid from the ghetto, not just Hawaiian-looking, actually Hawaiian, amongst mostly wealthy, fairer-skinned whites, Asians. As you might imagine, I was singled out, to put it lightly. Basically, I was bullied to shit the whole time. There was holes in my shoes. I didn't have any nice clothes. I didn't have my dad drove us to school in a Toyota, missing a bumper with a red door and like a white roof and then a brown, front hood, because it was all mishmashed replacement parts for this ancient beater car. And my dad was kind of this weird hippie dude. He was a hippie. My dad is an interesting character in his own right, but we drove to this school in basically Boots Riley's car from Sorry to Bother You, if you remember Cash's Screen. It's basically a car with I don't know if we ever had the drawstring windshield wipers, but the car was always falling apart like that. The people who arrived at the school that weren't us came in Mercedes, they came in Lamborghinis, they came in Porsches, some came in limos, some came in helicopters. But nobody landed on the roof of the school in a helicopter, but their parents had helicopters, some of them. Obama's school definitely has people with helicopters. Pierre Omidyar is the CEO of eBay, one of the billionaires who lives in Hawaii. He owns The Intercept also. He has a helicopter. He doesn't need helicopters. He has Gulfstreams. He has private jets. So, and his kids go to school, right where I went to school. This is one example. And so video games, and so in this, and so I was just being bullied for being bigger, because I was my body type was bigger, and a lot of Eurocentric, and then wannabe Euro, wealthy white kids would make fun of me because I was a bigger Hawaiian person, my body type was just larger than them. And so, and this was during the 90s, right? Of heroin chic and super fat phobia was at its, was really peaking, right? And it was just a really terrible time to be in that situation. So I just had a nightmare time. I literally thought going to school was hell, and I don't want to be hell. Literally was everyone else being a racist, fatphobic, abusive, bullying, terrible person, And then when I went home, it was almost even though the area that I was from, the kids who lived in my neighborhood, they were super rough. They they get into fist fights, they'd be throwing rocks, they'd be beating each other up and throwing each other around, right? Throwing each other off of cliffs and stuff, into the water. But still, they were some wild kids, a lot of Samoans too. So Samoan, they were Samoan, Fijian, Tongan, all the Pacific Islanders, Asian Pacific, just all of it, Filipinos. Samoans are super big. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Samoan. You don't want to get into fights with them if you're a smaller person. But those kids, they were never mean the way that the super rich white and Asian, the white and sellout Asians that want to be white, were at the $20,000 a year private school. They were never the CEO of eBay's kids. They were never Larry Ellison's kids who live in Hawaii, by the way, because he has his house right there in Lanai. He also has a colonial plantation on Dole Pineapples Island, and so it was almost they were I went to the one year my parents couldn't afford to send me to the super fancy private school. Or they for some reason, I forget, they transferred me out of that school because they always wanted me to go to the Catholic school because of colonialism and genocide, right? And missionaries that do all the human trafficking and child abuse, Christian Westerners. my parents are Christian Catholic because they're Hawaiian, but they were genocided. They were taken from their parents, and they had the Hawaiianists beaten out of them, and they were turned into Americans, right? So they believe themselves to be American Catholic people. That's why I was going to Catholic school, right? But they couldn't afford to send me to the Catholic school one year because I think my dad changed jobs. My dad was teaching. It's funny because my dad was working at Catholic schools and then also teaching in the after school, college courses at like Schofield Barracks, these U.S. military barracks. So he was working 2 jobs, right? And one of them was teaching the children of super rich white billionaires who moved to Hawaii, like the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and governors and Navy admirals and shit. And then the second job that he had to teach to even still make ends meet, even with the discounted rent, right? Living on a broken down seminary, like a decrepit former priest seminary to train Catholic priests, right? We lived in this space where priests once learned how to swing incense and learn how to be good Jesuits or be good Franciscans or the various Catholic priests. Like they didn't need that anymore because they didn't have any priests that were being trained there. So we're basically living in a falling down priest's school. There was a priest at one point that lived beneath us. I didn't really know him very much. But he was like a weird shut-in. It's where they train people who will grow up to become pedophiles, like Catholic priests. Speaking of child abuse. And so then, anyways, but coming back to the story of the. So that one year I was going to the school called Star of the Sea, and I got pulled out of that school because that was also a Catholic school. I got pulled out of school because there was financial troubles. There was always financial troubles. My family was just broke. They're always broke. They would have been more broke if they didn't get this special deal. They were boomers, so it was slightly better for them than other generations of Hawaiians, but they didn't without the assistance of the Catholic Church. It's not really assistance. Without the feudal serfdom, you get to live. It's kind of like, how people are being Google employees being lured into the overpriced Google offices, right, to prop up planetary capitalist real estate Ponzi schemes, are being lured back into the office with a $99 hotel deal package to work inside the Google offices, right? And that would just be, or like the Amazon company towns, right, where you live on Amazon, you live in Amazon housing. So that's just an old form of the Western capitalist system. It's called feudalism, and in South America where the Spanish installed, it's much worse in there than in Hawaii in many places. But you live on land that's owned by the company, right? But it's just like old school feudalism where why have a landlord that you pay the rent to and then a corporate lord that you work for and they extract money for a capitalist system when you can just have it all together, right? You work on the land that you live on and you pay, right? So the landlord and your work lord are the same thing. Your housing lord, right, landlord, and your work lord, that's your corporation you work for. It's the same thing, right? And it's all going to the same place, right? But that's the trick of the Western capitalism, is that they kind of split that out, and they go, you have your worklord, that's your corporation, and you have your landlord that's taking your rent that's extorting your labor value with a threat of police violence and mass evictions, and then you have your school lord, that's your university debt, and then you put that all together, right? And all the other debts that you have to pay, all your other your fealties that you have to pay. It all comes back to the same source, not exactly, but an oligarchy that's always behind all of that. But in old school feudalism, you just live in the landlord and the worklord is the same, and you just pay the person who owns the land that you are on the right to exist there, right? So my parents paid to the Catholic Church. They work for the Catholic Church, and they live on the Catholic Church, right? They work for right, and then everything that they make goes straight back to the Catholic Church. The private church is charging $20,000 a year for them per student, right? For my parents to teach. So that my parents are giving the Catholic Church millions of dollars a year in labor. They're taking most of it. When they come home, my parents are giving $1,400 of rent to the Catholic Church. So it's all one. That's the beauty of Catholicism, because it reveals what the truth of the Western system. Anyway, I'm off of talking about myself. You see, that's the problem. And nowadays, I gotta go talk about politics and education, and I'm supposed to be just like shooting the shit about my own life, but I'm not doing that. Anyways, so because they had to pull me out for 1 year from the private school when I was between preschool and kindergarten, I was just like, it was just horrible. It was just like because fatso, and you just think of all the fatphobic insults you can possibly think of, and the brown racist insults. They're just saying that all day. I was just being attacked by Asian and white students at this school, and then I went to just bullied, and I was like, the school is advanced. Like the private schools are like 2 or 3 years ahead, or at least a year or 2 years ahead of the public schools, to make sure that public schools children grow up to be slave plantation workers in the tourism industrial complex, serving tea, doing physical manual labor, underpaid labor, sexual slavery, working, dancing, fire dancing in the so-called Polynesian Cultural Center, shaking their hips at Waikiki, a fake plastic hula, driving a tour bus, giving a tour, putting lays on you at the airport, changing your sheets in the hotel, washing, cooking, and cleaning in the hotels and restaurants in Hawaii. So those people, they don't give you an education. They just basically hope you drop out, and then they send you to prison to mechanically separate Tyson chicken nuggets in an Arizona penitentiary, or go straight to one of this colonial Hawaii servant class, neo-feudal servant class jobs. It's just slavery basically. But if you went to the private school, you got a better education, and then you could manage the prisons. I mean. Companies. You can manage the prisons / plantations / serfdom / anyways. That's part of why I made Neofeud, is because like why are they describing all these systems so differently? It's just kind of like whatever feudalism, feudalism, capitalism, slavery. I mean, whichever they're always going for the maximum enslavement. Right, but it's like these names that Western colonizers call their economic, political, social system. The way they run their civilizations is very superficial. The names, right? I was watching Cory Doctorow talk about how feudalism is bad because that's when people who don't do anything but own property make money, and capitalism is better and different. And so Bob Iger is making money doing things, and it was like, Corey, wanna be William Gibson cyberpunk author? What's wrong with you? Oh, that's right, you were raised in the West. But anyway, so that's part of why I made Neofeud, because I'm looking at my parents like, Mom and Dad, you guys are feudal serfs. You guys live on Catholic property. You work for the Catholic Church. You give all your work labor gets exploited out and taken as unpaid wages that go straight to the Catholic Church and whatever investments that they have in Hawaii. And then you come home and you pay your rent to your landlord, that is the Catholic Church. So everything that you have goes straight to them, and you get just enough to survive so you can come back the next day. Right? And you're not even Catholic white people. You're Hawaiians. You are white, human trafficked, brainwashed Hawaiians. Right? So colonialism, feudalism, and all the Catholic Church takes that money, invested in Wall Street, makes more money, making more money from the capitalism that they're running, right? So you have feudalism, right? You have slavery because you have all these people in our neighborhood that are literally locked into their houses, right? They're locked into their rooms, and then they get brought out to work at specific jobs. You got people that are being thrown up against the wall like Maui Pineapple, right? Being beaten and punched in the face, who are working in pineapple fields in the 2000s. That's not even when I was born. That was in the 2000s, 21st century, right? You got slavery right there in Hawaii, right? You got your feudal serfs. You live on the land and you work at the company. You live on the company land and you work at the company store under Catholicism, right? Under the good holy Christian people that you think that you are. My dad reads stories about pedophilia, watches that movie Spotlight with Michael Keaton. It's like, oh, it's so terrible that a few priests did such a terrible thing. You know, like you are surrounded by human child sex trafficking, feudal again. So slavery in the Maui Pineapple and people being locked into their houses, being forced to work for terrible wages in sex, service industry, manual grueling labor, and etc. Right? You got feudalism, you got slavery, all under capitalism. This money's going straight to Wall Street. It's all going to buy more property to accumulate more capital, right? It's going to the giant tourism capitalist corporations that are making money exploiting all the labor in Waikiki, right? So you got feudalism, capitalism, slavery. You got all of it, all at the same time. And it's all colonialism because Hawaii is a colony of the United States. So, so Neofeud is like, what the hell? What education do you have in your Western world? So, and that's, you don't have to be Catholic. That's the Catholic Church. It can be non-denominational, feudalism, colonialism, and slavery. Then you also have conservative Christian. I mean, the Mr. Sound of Freedom is, these people are working under, the evangelical, biblical, Protestant. I mean, you got all these different flavors of the same bullshit. They all came from Europe. And they create new and more virulent forms, like kind of like the XBB Kraken COVID variant is not the same as the Omicron variant. It's different from the Delta variant. It's different from the other subvariants of the Omicron. But what do? They're all gonna infect you and kill you. But it's like, oh well, we have the Omicron. See the Delta variant, and now see the Delta variant, that was feudalism. But now we're better. Now we're the Omicron variant. Right, that's America, right? Old school. Well, we're not the Catholics. We are not the conservative. We Catholics are not the evangelical, Southern Baptist, fundamentalist, XBB variant. We're just we're the XB1 variant. We're not the XB2 variant. That's the Catholic Church pointing at because my dad would talk about those Protestant Republican, those fundamentalist, quiverful conservatives. Those are the bad ones. Those are the XB2 variant, right? But we, the Catholics, we're only the XB1 variant, so we're good. But that's the West talking about each other. You're all fucking COVID, your cultural virus, your cultural disease. But anyways, I'm off of talking about myself yet again, failing. You see, yet again, failing to talk about myself in the past historical apolitical sense. Video games. So because I had to get pulled out of the private school, right, that my parents taught at, my mom taught there. My mom like moved jobs, right, and because she moved jobs teaching at one Catholic school, she eventually got another job teaching at another Catholic school. And the only reason why she got the job is because one of my aunts was a very much high up. She's basically the equivalent of like a 2-star general in the Catholic Army. She was a mother superior at one point. She spoke 8 languages. And most of them were European, obviously. She also is an Asian Pacific Islander. She's a very round lady. She's just like a Japanese Hawaiian looking face. Like you would have thought she was Hawaiian. You would have been like, oh, that's definitely some Hawaiian lady if you just saw her anywhere else, right? But she was also deeply forced Catholicized. She was forced Christianized. She is a mother superior, but she climbed the ranks very high, kind of like Kamala Harris or Obama. She's like Kamala Harris or Obama, but for the Catholic Church. She climbed very high, and she became. She worked in Rome for a while, surrounded by pedophiles and millionaires and horrible colonialists, right? And then she was deployed to India. She was the head of the Indo-Pacific Command for the Catholic Church at one point. Let's put it that way. Not the, because the Catholic, the way the church is, it has multiple different subdivisions. There's different I forgot all the terminology because it's been a while since I've been in the Catholic world. But there's Sacred Hearts, there's Franciscan, there's the Maryknoll sisters, there's different orders. But her order, she was in charge of all of the Indo and the Pacific region Asia Pacific and Indo region for the order at one point. And so she had great power. Well, not really power. It doesn't really work. It's she had great pull, great her what she said had great weight, and what she did had great weight at one point. So she was able to get. That's how my family got the both the jobs in the Catholic Church. They're not very good jobs, but they are jobs, I guess. And then the serf jobs, and then also the staying in the old seminaries was because she was able to pull strings to get that to happen. So it's all that's also the feudalism, right? Speaking of nepo hires, right? It's just like if you have family members in the Catholic Church or obviously high places in the business community working at Google's or whatever, you can get things done for you, right? And so that was how the family got to live in Hawaii. Otherwise, my family would be out of Hawaii. They'd be living in some shithole in Los Angeles, Skid Row or something, you know. As I said, most Hawaiians cannot even afford to live in Hawaii, even if they wanted to, because of the U.S. and its capitalist colonial occupation. So, so back to this story. So after my parents pulled me out because my mom lost a job, I had to go. I went to the public school. Kalihi Elementary is a school. So is a public school. Again, in the most poorest area of the entire so-called United States, which is in Hawaii, and that school. It was like rusting, falling apart. They didn't have the books were like all ancient, you know. It was right next to the public housing, basically the ghetto, like literally the housing's there, and then the housing was like in front of the school. So it was like everyone from the ultra low income housing, right? If you could get into if you couldn't get into ultra low income housing, you could live in one of the slave, house cut into 20 rooms with locks on the outside, and then you go from there, from the ghetto housing, straight into the school, and then after that there's another school, right? There's 2 schools. But you know what the funny thing is, the kids at that school, one thing I noticed when I went to that school, the very impoverished public school, which is you know lots of Pacific Islanders, like Filipino and Hawaiian and Samoan, Tahitian, like Southeast Asian, you know. All the kids are mostly Pacific Islander too, right? And the thing is, the kids there were actually, they were like more rough, but the kids there were actually nicer than the kids at the super rich kids and the medium rich kids and the wannabe rich kids, whose parents were sending them to that $20,000 school. They were the worst. Like they were not going out punching and kicking all the time, or not to say the kids at the school are punching and kicking all the time, but they were less hands-on kids, let's say, because mommy and daddy would sue anyone for touching anyone ever, and everyone was like the one child, right? One thing was like a lot of the kids were like the only child or one of 2 kids, right? Think of the Ivy League. Think of the wannabe millionaire class and the billionaire class, right? They have their one child and they put all their energy into that one child, right? They make sure the kid goes to extracurricular robotics projects. They got like 3 tutors for that kid. That kid is making sure that is getting 1,600 SATs. They want that kid to go to Harvard or Princeton and Yale, come out and make trillions of dollars for mommy and daddy, so that mommy and daddy, right, can go back to China or Vietnam or South America and take back their colony with the help of the United States coup, right? Or whatever mommy and daddy want. It's the kind of people that go to these schools. It's their future Wang Guaidos and the future Tsai Ing-wens of the world. They go to these private schools in Hawaii, and they're all the people like they call. That's why people come to the United States. It's the capitalist capital of the shithole Western world. And so those kids were real terrible. They were really the worst. They were super mean. They don't hit you, but they treat you like they treat everyone like garbage, because that's the way the parents treat everyone, right? And then if you do really well, you can work for Victoria Nuland and install Nazis. Victoria Nuland doesn't punch or hit anyone. All she does is install Nazis around the world, right? Like in Ukraine, and then have them slaughter hundreds of thousands of people and get hundreds of thousands of people killed, and then do mass lynchings of Jews and Roma and ethnic minorities. So, but you don't actually punch or kick anyone. You just make other people do bad stuff for you. So those are the kind of kids, whose parents work for those kind of organizations, right? Where they're going there. So you have to practice like punching down, like really punching down to lift yourself higher, right? And so I was the most down. in the class. At the public school, these are all the kids of the servant classes, right? Of the slave, servant, low working class, slave, servant, serf, working class, right? And they were just, they were like rough, and sometimes it could be, some of them were like not the nicest, but no, there was no like, there wasn't. I didn't experience the bullying stuff. This kind of like, you're bad because you're different. You're bad because you're brown, and you are beneath us. You're beneath us, and we stomp on you, right? They were just like kids who had like their parents were like really poor, and there's probably like there's probably some domestic violence happening. Like kind of in John Romero's family, he talks about that was the thing that happened with him, unfortunately. And I mean, I was lucky that we didn't have that because of who my parents were. They were like the hands off. We don't hit boomer hippie generation. They were like that was who they were. Probably because my mom was, well, both of them, and my mom especially was like badly beaten by her parents, which part of colonization was bringing in physical beatings and treating children like less than dirt, which is that's a Western thing. Seen not heard. Obviously, the quiverful and conservative Christian and evangelicals have their very, very extreme versions of like child massive corporal punishment and also abuse, including sexual abuse, is just normalized in that world. But just in general, the colonial world is all about extreme physical corporal punishment of children. And so my mom experienced that, and she also experienced that in school, because physically beating indigenous children to stop them from practicing their language and culture was part of the program in Hawaii, like in many other places across the what the U.S. did it to indigenous people and Native Americans, and Canadians did it to their First Nations people, including the Catholic Church, specifically in the residential schools and that kind of thing. So Hawaii actually had most of Hawaii was all boarding schools. Basically, it was genocide school. It was not necessarily always killing all the children, but it was about forcefully and including with physical punishment, beating the Hawaiian indigenous culture out, beating the Hawaiianists out, and then forcefully Americanizing. That's both of my parents went through that. So, and that part, it's I think it's disingenuous to just be like, oh well, my parents were drunk. And it's not correct. It's leaving a lot of the context out. Just be like, my dad was a drunk, and I was hit, and there was physical abuse. If you leave out the rest of the context of the colonization, right, the genocide, the force, the forced indoctrination, which include physical forced indoctrination, the indigenous ways which were not violent child rearing that were changed and altered by the colonization that installed the violent upbringing, right? Because if you leave that out, then it kind of just seems like, oh, well, Hawaiians were just violent, backwards, bad people, right? If you leave that out, then you're just like, well, some people just drink and then they made bad life choices and then they beat their kids. And like, obviously, like people make choices in their life. But if your entire family is like working in terrible mines for terrible wages, like John Romero's dad, and like also is suffering from forced self-hatred because being Mexican is bad and being brown is bad in white supremacist America. If you leave that out, I mean, it's kind of like it benefits white supremacy, colonialism, and the capitalist system that they all come from and work with. If you just describe it that way, so that's that. I'm not saying that that's like a problem with the book. I'm just saying, like, these are all things that had happened in the neighborhoods that I'm in, and I wouldn't have been able to tell you like more of the backstory on that until far more recently, like within the last 5 to 10 years. Like even when Neofeud came out, I didn't even realize why a lot of the other reasons why Hawaii, and the part of Hawaii as a native Hawaiian person, the Hawaii that I experienced in the most impoverished ghettos, right, of the colony of Hawaii in the United States, was that way until very, very recently. But anyways, okay, but that's so. Anyway, that's I'm going off on this other side stuff, but see, I can't stop. But when I went to that other school, the kids were nicer. They were more rough, but they were not. We were always like I was closer friends with kids from the most impoverished, most the kids that were throwing rocks at each other. I was closer friends with them than anyone really that I was friends with. At the actual private school, like with like and there's some people that I did have that were friends, but they were for the most part they were just assholes, and they were very selfish, self-absorbed, because their parents, well, number one, their parents could afford to pay tens of thousands of dollars, or at the time it was like $8,000, $10,000 to send them there, and their parents were training their children to be self-absorbed, good Americans, right, who look out for number one, right, under selfish, individualized capitalism as opposed to the evil communism, right? This is the 20th century, obviously. And the parents who were, again, Asian and Pacific Islander, but white inside, or white, just white. And the people who were just white were extra wealthy. They were the wealthiest of the white. They were like literally executives. Like I worked for the head of Microsoft at one point, or one of the top brass. He was like the president of Microsoft's internet division was his title. White. Another guy was the biggest indie game company runner who was married to a Connecticut-based bank, just one of the wealthiest old money banking families in the United States. White, right? And funny thing is, actually, the super rich white guys were actually in Hawaii were a little bit more chill than the Asians. The rich Asians and Hawaiian families, the ones that were like had enlightened themselves or had bought into white supremacy, like the Kamala Harris, Obama style people. The Asian and the non-white, they were even like more rabidly hardcore white supremacist and capitalist in many ways. In part because they were aspiring to be the ultra wealthy, and in part because they had to prove how dedicated they were to the United States, because Hawaii is a colony, right? Illegal occupation. How dedicated these sellout Hawaiians and Asians were to America, capitalism, the ideal of not necessarily white supremacy like KKK, but like America is the greatest country in the world, and as a white country, we have to spread. And it tries to code it in a way that we're not saying white people are better than everyone else, but look at what the BBC and CBC and the U.S. Look at what Nikki Haley says, right? The Republicans just say it out loud. China has to be destroyed by the great American United States. She's an Indian person, right? Nikki Haley is running for president on the Republican, under the Republican Party. She's a very much like a someone from Hawaii, but we don't have as many East Indians. Both of her parents are Indian from India, and she has completely changed her name, changed who she is to seem like a white person. Talks with a southern accent that she made up, right? This is right. It acts even more white because part of the reason why she has to act even and talk and be even more belligerently white supremacist, American supremacist, imperialist, hegemonic, anti-China, all this stuff, is because she has to. If there's any question, right, that hey, you're not even white, you're Indian. Right? It's like the Mexicans who have to prove that they're white. They can be even more virulently white. Like my aunt was an Asian in Portland. She literally cut her eyes to make them look more white. She dyed her skin white. She basically like literally like used like whiteness infusions. Not like sometimes there are like skin whitening creams. That's a big part of this colorism that's problematic all over parts of Asia. A lot of that due to colonialism. But she dyed her skin white and then acted, and she changed her accent to sound like she had a Southern Republican, or fake Southern Republican accent. She married a billionaire Republican who literally pioneered drilling in Alaska, and had direct contracts with the U.S. military. He was a military arms dealer and fossil fuel oligarch. So my aunt was a Hawaiian Asian woman who changed her entire physical appearance, including changing her eye shape, changing her skin color, changing her accent, and she berated and spat down and beat up but she didn't, I think she didn't physically beat, but she basically would scream racist obscenities at the dozens of Hispanic maids that she had in her household. And I remember my dad visited her, right? Because again, my family's all, they're Hawaiian, they're mixed, but they're Hawaiian, right? My dad from Hawaii, he was like a hippie liberal boomer visiting his also boomer aunt or his sister, right? And watched her she had basically turned into the most racist white person, but she wasn't even white. The most racist, super rich. She did. Just as another example, that aunt, she did makeup for the CNN anchor. So it's the CNN anchor Ann Curry. Anybody who's older than anybody know who Ann Curry is? If you're 40 years old, you probably know who that is. If you're older than 40, you probably know who that is. But let me see. So Ann Curry was she worked. She was an American journalist and photojournalist. And she was it CNN? I swear it was CNN. Or was it CBS? She was on NBC. So she was the anchor NBC from 2012 even in the 1980s and the 90s. She was at NBC in the 90s. And then she came back to NBC. So she was on national U.S. news. So my aunt did makeup for Ann Curry. Ann Curry is also part Asian, right? And so and my aunt, she was part Asian as well. She was Asian and Pacific Islander. And so she did makeup for Ann Curry. My aunt also did makeup for Colin Powell. He's the United States president's cabinet member, Colin Powell. Yellow Cake Colin Powell, starting wars around the world in the Republican administration, right, of George W. Bush. So she ascended to that level of status, and she was a Hawaiian and Asian multimillionaire Republican, right? And then her younger brother was this liberal hippie guy who working inside of the most impoverished areas of the United States in Hawaii, right? And then teaching at the private school, right? And then he visited his aunt and then saw she's screaming "You frickin' beaner, why are you changing the sheet so slowly?" She would yell racist obscenities at the Mexicans, the Mexican maids. The thing is, she used to be just as brown as them, but she intentionally whitened herself to make her Asian Pacific Islander self look whiter than the Mexicans. Marry this wealthy white guy, right? Again, he's old military, U.S. military. The family, just as an example of the kind of family that my aunt's married into, the last name has a Roman numeral 7 after it. So it's I'm not gonna say who it is, but it's it'd be something Bill Walker the 8th, Bill Walker the 9th, Warren Lucas, Warren Lucas Smith the 7th, right? The reason why it's the 7th is because literally the family was feudal on the East Coast. They're one of the first families that came to the West Coast, Oregon specifically, which was a white ethno state. They started they were always working with the United States government in the military and then in fossil fuel. And then they were always deeply connected in the U.S. government and the Republican side. And so this is what my Hawaiian Asian auntie married into one of the oldest, wealthiest Republican, Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Teutonic white, the most Angloid white you could possibly get this family. You look at the kids, even the kids are they're Asian Pacific. The kids they look like pictures of Thomas Jefferson. A lot of them. The dad definitely did. And so, but in order to join that family, she had to become more racist than elite white Republicans. She had to become more pro-American than the elite white Republicans, right? And so that self-hatred and then self-destruction, right? John Romero also talks about how being raised in a time in which children, because it was thought incorrectly, and John Romero adds that to his book, it was thought incorrectly, misguidedly, that if your Mexican child, right, was raised in the mid 20th century, was raised without Spanish language, without connection to your Mexican culture, right, then your child would be spared racism, right? And that turned out to be false. And sometimes it wasn't that. Sometimes it was because you wanted your Mexican child to be as non-Mexican, as white American as possible, to ascend in their careers, to ascend and to make more money, right? This is a thing that is often not said, but a lot of, you can be part of the colonized world, right? And it is obviously legit, and it is a natural thing for human beings to want the best for their children. But if, I would, but what imperialism is, as Thomas Sankara also says, is it's not just about imperialism. Is not, which is just it's colonialism spelled differently, right? But this colonial capitalist system does not just function upon beating up, shooting, military subjugation, whipping the backs of Africa, Asia, and Latin America in their countries and also internally. That's not just how it works. It's also loans, right? It's aid, it's assistance, it's you could get a great job, it's you could climb the ladder, it's you could become a CNN anchor's makeup artist, or a wealthy celebrity, or a Fortune 500 company runner, or a CEO, or a Goldman Sachs high frequency trading algorithm programmer. You could make it, is part of the pull, right? There are sticks that colonial capitalism pulls out and imperialism pulls out, but then there's also the carrots that are arguably more destructive and perpetuate itself longer, right? So Mexican, Hawaiian, Asian, and the world's children, indigenous children in Turtle Island, right? It's part of what Reservation Dogs is about. It's about kids being pulled, right, into the false promise that you could make it big as a native, person from Oklahoma on your reservation. If you leave your reservation and come to Los Angeles in California, right, you will somehow be incorporated into this great project called America, as a famous P. Diddy or something, right? And so that pull sucks it sucks the history and the life and the culture and the potential revolutionary struggle that could undo the colonial capitalist system. It sucks the life out of it, and then it causes the world's black and brown, indigenous, and most oppressed people to sacrifice their children to the god of Moloch, basically, to sacrifice their children to the god of the dollar. And go, child, you should not learn. Why would you want to learn your Hawaiian history when you could just be a Catholic Christian and work like mommy and daddy as serfs, teaching the children of billionaires and millionaires? And maybe you could become one, right? Why learn your Mexican heritage? Why learn the history when you could just be a white American in, Texas or California, and you have a chance to ascend the ladder, right? Why learn your African heritage and your connections to the 1.4 billion people in Africa that outnumber the Americans, and the struggles there, right? That are actually, a lot of the things that you have won are struggles of African people in the United States and in Africa. Why learn that when you could just be a black person, but under westernized, Americanized capitalism, trying to make money get your biggest bag you possibly can in some black version of Wall Street or celebrity success, right? And then ignore everyone outside of that, right? Just forget your roots, forget where you came from. Just be a black American making lots of money. Why connect back to the history of the struggle of Asia and the centuries and the great successes that historically and now you have as a Chinese person, as a Vietnamese person, right? Why look back at the history when you could just be, Ann Curry, when you could just be, Nikki Haley? Give up your Indianness and the struggle there. Give up that history there. Give up what has happened there. Just be a white woman, Nikki Haley in America. Just be Kamala Harris, right? Who throws her fellow people of color, Asian, Indian and black and everyone else into prisons in California for ascending her career, right? Under the U.S. empire, right? So, it is a great weapon. That's a lot of what Neofeud is also about. It's what Neofeud 2 definitely is about. Is about that's not. It's not just kind of like. I think that process of like ripping out cultures and then forming them, like dipping brown and black and Asian people and the people of all colors of the world's human rainbow, taking those people, taking their children, dipping them into a bucket of white paint and then sticking them as one of the stars on the American flag. That is the greatest project of the last century. You know, the greatest horrible project of the last century. That is the United States project, right? And based on this sucking of the world's wealth and resources into the United States, in order to be able to feign like there's some kind of great equal democratic human rights future there. But you know, that was it was a stronger imperial tactic in the 20th century. It's not looking as good now, you know. But anyways, okay, I'm like way off of my script. This is not talking about Silver Spook anymore. But that, you know, that is a lot of the stuff that the way in which, I mean, Neofeud, the game itself, certainly deals with that, like how people are, like Protege as a character, part of his deal is he's looking up, and in the beginning he begins like, how can I ascend into the upper echelons of this great, beautiful palace? How can I get out of this ghetto that I'm in and get up there, right? A lot of the characters are like, how can I climb that ladder? How can I get up there? But never mind the fact that, you know, like everything is falling apart, right, in the world of Neofeud. Like everything in Hawaii is falling apart because everyone is looking upwards. Nobody's looking at everyone who has fallen away and who has lost and who is falling through the cracks. And the world itself is being killed, right? As time goes forward, it gets more and more obvious, right, that this capitalist colonial system is killing everything, including the people, making everyone actually worse off, killing culture, killing difference, increasing fascism, increasing hate, increasing all those things, increasing the destruction of the entire planetary ecosystems, right? But it was less obvious in the 1980s. You know, it was even less obvious in the 1960s, right? The U.S. had successfully propagandized so many people under the television-based, the medium is the message, and the medium was television, and it was a one-to-many controlled network. And America successfully propagandized through its films and its TV that the worst thing in the world was Nazism. America defeated it, and now democracy and freedom reign. And all we got to do is defeat this communism, and then the world will be, the world will be, rainbows and apple pie and French fries, which equals happiness forever, And that was the world in which John Romero's parents were coming up in. That's what he was raised. The world. That's where my parents were raised in. They were raised in this world where we're all gonna be American now, right? Now all of that was a lie, but it was a more solid lie in the mid 20th century. But anyways, and capitalism was gonna guide it all because America was synonymous with capitalism, and sadly it is. Video games served as an. But let me finish this up, and I gotta go because I gotta go streaming again on the Twitch later. Maybe I'll continue talking about myself and then accidentally not talking about myself on another one of these streams. But depending on if people like me, I was gonna say I'm kind of going into many directions at once, but I can't stop doing that nowadays. Although it is important because like. Again, if I just tell you, well, I'm from a poor part of Hawaii, and it was hard, and but now I'm doing so much better because there's a version of my story where it's just Silver Spook, poor Hawaiian child, sells $4,000 worth of video games to help his fellow poor Hawaiian kids out of student lunch debt. You know what I'm saying? There's a version that because I don't want to tell that story. That story enables racism, colonialism, capitalism, and the U.S. plutocracy that is destroying the world in Hawaii. And I don't want to tell that story. I have to always contextualize it because if I just go, I was from a poor ghetto, but thanks to the great American democracy and freedom and free enterprise system, now I run Silver Spook Games and I'm a successful CEO. But no, number one, I'm not a CEO. Number two, fuck the United States. It didn't help me do shit. Number three, I don't want anyone's kids anyone could have made a video game company and been successful, probably way more successful if they hadn't had to live in a goddamn ghetto with no resources, right? I hate these puff pieces where it's some black kid in New York City. That's literally the story, right? Black kid in New York City, collects, does laundry for, 6 months and makes enough money to, pay 1 month of family's rent or some bullshit supposedly feel good story about the great, like, no, there should not. Why are there any homeless children? Why are there people living locked behind doors? Why are there people who make $5,000 a year when the average rent in Hawaii is like $3,000 freaking dollars? No, that's not it's amazing, yes, that Silver Spook Games exists as a cooperative business and is making games still under this horrible system, but it's not thanks to the system. It's in despite of that system. The story, I don't want to have to tell Neofeud. I have to tell Neofeud because we live under neo-feudalism. But one day, I hope my kids don't have to tell that story. They could tell another story. I hope that because our kids are learning how to do game making and storytelling, and they're doing very well at it. But I don't want them to have to tell these sad stories because I don't want to have to tell these nightmarish, hellish, dystopian stories because my kids don't live in a Western colonialist, feudalist, capitalist, slavist, white supremacist dystopia. But we don't yet live there, so that's why I got to do that. Or at least some of the time I got to do that story. Anyways, okay, so video games served as an escape from the troubling and often harsh reality of life for me, which was about going to school and being surrounded by richer people who were either richer and whiter people or people who were not white but deeply indoctrinated in white supremacy. And so I didn't have a good time in school, to put it lightly, the entire time. And so I escaped into games and would relish getting home in the Toyota Corolla, getting into the house in the broken down seminary of a Catholic church where my parents were feudal serfs, and playing Nintendo. I was playing Mario and Duck Hunt, and I'm a little bit younger than John, so I'm a millennial, Zennial 83, right? Is when I was born. The cusp between the Gen X and the millennials, I guess, is one way some people describe it. And so, like, being in that time, I was 4 years old, prime age for playing Nintendo, and then later the Genesis, etc. And so in games, I was happy and I was in control. I felt like, unlike when I was in school where I wasn't in control, I was at the whim of all these other horrible people. Called the other kids who were bullying, and there's no attempt to even stop that. At the same time, because the tourism industry dominates the island, there was also always a push to airbrush over these not so nice aspects of Hawaii to pretend that everything is beautiful and idyllic and postcard paradise, even if it isn't, because we just want vacationers to fly in, spend their money, and mahalo, come back again next year. As King Warren, the most powerful neo-feudal royal, comments in Neofeud, there are no flaws in paradise. That is an actual line from Neofeud also. And like that is certainly, I'm thinking about Hawaii when I wrote that line. It's also it's a bad misquote of a particular leader of a particular country, but that is also the way people want Hawaii to be perceived as a perfect, idyllic, as part of the American, right? This American exceptionalism, the American the poison carrot that America hands out, which is we're the best, and if you do well in America, you can have your Hawaiian vacation at the end of your year of hard work, right? Under American capitalism. Experiences like these were hugely impactful on my worldview and are infused throughout Neofeud and my work. Anyways, so that's some very basic of my early upbringing, and I think I gotta go. Maybe I'll continue doing this on the next stream. Possibly, we'll see. Or if everybody's like, oh God, I don't want to hear about your freaking life story. I don't want to hear that, man. Just talk about just talk about Spider-Man. Probably nobody will say exactly that, except for some, child trafficking dickheads who follow the Sound of Freedom guy. But But we will. Big Teal says it's weird to make sure where people blame themselves. Exactly, Big Teal. But anyways, it is as good a time as any to end. I gotta go eat lunch and I gotta come back and stream. So I'll be back. Don't forget, if you want to support what we do here at the Silver Spook Cooperative, including me writing my own biography. I have to get a ghostwriter and be like, make me sound cool, you know, make me sound cool. I don't have time to do all that, you know. If you would like to support what we do here, though, you can support us through getting games like Neofeud. It's a cyberpunk adventure game in a vein of Blade Runner with an overlay of Game of Thrones like political intrigue, and hand painted stylized visuals. All the art, there's a big thing. I'm going to talk about this later, but you know, there's a huge thing happening now with AI art being used to generate the Dungeons and Dragons artwork for their latest products, among other things. Museums are using AI generated art to make dinosaurs, and it's really, you know, not good. But you know, all the Silver Spook games art is generated from my hands and the Wacom tablet that I use to paint. This is the pen that I used to make all of Neofeud, by the way. I only have basically this pen. That's all I got. It's the same tablet too. I don't want to pick it up because I don't want to knock this drink over. But this is the pen that made Neofeud. No AI art, no generative AI involved in that. And so if you want to support actual artists making actual indie games, if you want to support anti-capitalist, trans-indigenous artists making actual anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist games, also check out Neofeud. And also don't forget, you can get Neofeud on itch.io if you get games in that way. It is available for Windows, Mac, and Linux, and the maximum revenue comes to us when you get it there. And you can also get other games like Pigeon with Gun, Decolonators, and Woman is a book by Holly, who was raised in right-wing evangelical Protestant Christianity, and is kind of dunking on that from the perspective of Mary in the Bible, talking about all the problems with this so-called good people under the so-called Christianity. And consider picking this book up. You can get it for free. Throw some money our way. Consider helping us through Ko-Fi as well as Patreon at patreon.com/Neofeud. When you become a Patreon, it does help us out because you get access to behind the scenes of what we're working on. Oh, you also get to support us in an ongoing fashion. You get the access to the Silver Spook Discord and over 1,000 hours of content categorized by myself according to the topics that I'm talking about to make it easier to find streams and videos that I've done over the last 6 years or so. And also, you get to help indigenous people do decolonization and land back and etc. Also, don't forget you can follow at Silver Spook Games at octodon.social, at Silver Spook Games at mastodon.social, and you can also follow Silver Spook Games on Twitter at Silver Spook Guy, Silver Spook Guy, Silver Spook Games on Twitter for the game stuff, and of course Facebook, Instagram, and you can also follow Terminus C. Terminus C is the account for Terminus Cyberstar, which is a low poly cyberpunk immersive sim that I am the content director and lead writer of. It's like a cyberpunk RPG, and you can follow this game over here and join the Discord. And don't forget, you can follow Holly. And also, Big Teal, who's in the chat, will be joining us soon on one of the Silver Spook streams on the Twitch channel. So don't forget to follow that as well, and look out for that because that's coming up soon. And also, we were talking about colonialism in the south of the U.S. And Central South America, if I'm not mistaken. And Big Teal is also a educator, has taught at a college level on those topics, and so that really looking forward to that. Holly is also, of course, followable at this account, the Tech Fairy, poet, educator, moderator here, married to myself, producer and manager with Kate Nix, which is a Twitch stream music and variety show, and I'm also parent with myself, and educator, and writing books like we said earlier, taking pictures. I'm a Mahu person, which is somebody who is it's a Hawaiian native Hawaiian gender that was erased by U.S. colonization. One of the things they erased, but it is gender fluid, and so a lot of times the reason why I have two different pictures of the cover is because depending on the time, I'm literally gender fluid in the sense of like my presentation changes, and that's just who I am. Um, and if you want to learn more about that, I might be talking more about that on the Twitch stream later on today. But don't forget to follow Holly. Thanks to all the people who have supported us, like all these people on this list. Massively appreciated. Thanks, Victor, and everyone else for tuning in. And until next time, keep your mirror shades polished. Write your autobiography. Live your life in first person or third person if you prefer that angle, or maybe live your life in isometric if you are a Fallout 2 aficionado. Up to you. Totally up to you. Live your life. Live your life in side-scrolling platform, pixel art if you want to, and have fun. And we'll be back later on.